Hi, my name is Matt Bessel. I'm a clinical social worker with the Department of Veterans Affairs. I've been working there for 24 years at Northport, Long Island. I started the first ever Native American Special Emphasis Program for DEO, doing that for 7 years, and then started the second ever LGBT employees group in the Department of Veterans Affairs. After learning that a gentleman who has been with us at Out and Equal this week, Jeff Pellegrini, had begun with others that group at the Portland VA. I also am here today as a steward with Local 1843 of the American Federation of Government Employees Union, who had funded me to be here, and they are beginning to look more about what labor is doing within AFGE about LGBT respect in the workplace. So I'm very grateful that they chose to allow me to be with them, with you all here today. So,
hello, everybody. Hello. Anyway, one of my areas of expertise is strategic planning, and when we had Prop 8 succeed in California, where for the first time civil rights were taken away from people that had existing civil rights in the United States, and then suddenly same-sex married couples became a separate class, and other couples that were same-sex that wanted to get married but couldn't and had to get domestic partnerships became third class. So the key thing was we had to get organized, and the purpose of strategic planning is to give you a vision that you capture and organize with details of how to get there. These details should always be at a high level, and you should have goals. So the strategic plan I originally wrote in 2008 and then updated in January 2009 included 11 different goals. And one of the primary goals, because I'm also an IT geek, was to use the social net media for getting our message out. We learned during Prop 8 that the commercial news services were not really telling our story. In fact, they were helping us look bad and dehumanizing us. They were really pushing the stereotypes and then making people that were heteronormative look like the only acceptable people, the only acceptable humans. But here we were, we have families, we raise children, we have parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews and cousins. We are human. And those of us in the federal workforce, we know we contribute to national value. And that's really relevant. So we had to consider all those things. And I hit each of the different areas, and I can send anybody who wants a copy of that strategic plan that was written in 2009. It was designed for basically having leadership from within a region or a state and going that route and really organizing your state more so than a federal plan, but it'll give you a good idea of what to aim for. Now, one of the most important things with strategic planning, and this is also in there, is when you're trying to organize a movement, and that's what we are, we're the equality movement. You have to think of how to teach people how to be equality activists. So mentoring is very important. And so you want to basically encourage people to teach others to do the things we do. Everything we're doing, anybody else can do, and that is the process you must keep in your mind, that none of us are amazing, but that all of us together are what is truly amazing. Now, one of the areas that they wanted us to discuss today is if ENDA passes and if DOMA is repealed. Well, for those of us in the federal workforce, that's really relevant, because the people that are hurt the most by DOMA are federal employees. Because let's face it, some of us live in states where people are allowed to get married legally that are same sex. But even if you are in one of those states and you have one of those marriages, you cannot share your health benefits, which is by far the most expensive and important benefit you receive with your spouse. You can share it with your spouse's children. You can share it with your children because, you can actually adopt your spouse's children, but you can't share it with your spouse. However, as DOMA is repealed, this is something you really have to think about and how you're going to work within your agency and your department to get them to do the right things to make everything equal. Now, with ENDA, technically we have Executive Order 13087 signed by President Bill Clinton in 1996. Technically, we are supposed to be protected from the kind of discrimination we are experiencing in our agencies and departments. And what's the reason? Well, there's a couple reasons, and it depends where you are. Some departments are better than others. I suspect those people in the State Department and in the Office of Personnel Management are in better shape than most of the other departments. I'm in the Department of Defense. I can honestly say we're in the worst shape. And one of the reasons we're in the worst shape was they refused to train about it. They don't train about that executive order that protects us. They don't even train the EEO counselors to tell those of us that are being discriminated against basis sexual orientation to go to the Office of Special Counsel and file under Title V prohibited personnel practices in that form for your discrimination. They don't even teach EEO counselors that transgender folks are protected under Title VII basis sex gender stereotyping. So having this particular executive order does give us protection, but that protection doesn't work if it is not implemented and it is not taught. So whether it is implemented or taught or not in your agency or department, it is up to each of you to work within your groups for your agencies and departments that are equality activists, allies, and LGBT, and start teaching and start pushing the issues and pushing your organizations to start teaching and enforcing. Another area where we have protections, which is not on this list, is the Hate Crimes Protections Act. Now, this one's important. I have been on a base where I have experienced hate crime since the beginning of being at that base. We're now at a point where my car is parked next to the entrance of our building and all the smokers know what I've lived through so they can keep a watch on my car. We shouldn't have to do that, but we do. And when these things have happened, and I've called base security, what happened is before that 2009 law was passed, they would say it's just a misdemeanor, there's nothing we can do. But once the act was passed and I called up, they tried that same logic because they were not taught about the Hate Crime Preventions Act. So that's one of the things you have to strategize and educate your security and your legal people about on the federal properties that you are working at. And I explained to them that this is no longer a misdemeanor. This is now a felony. And they understood. And they realized it was serious, so they made sure that my car was now parked within view of a camcorder from another building. With ENDA, the reason why having an executive order is good is it has protection, but it's not good if it's not implemented. And we know that some executives will not implement it. We know that when Scott Block was placed in charge of the Office of Special Counsel, anybody who complained about being harassed for being LGBT, he made their lives worse and made sure that they were forced out of the government. And that was during an administration where they were not exactly the most pro-equality administration we've ever had. This could happen again. So having an executive order depends on the executive. Governors can also have executive orders. There are a lot of states with those kinds of protections via the executive order of governors. But once again, these things can be removed, they can be ignored, not very good. But if ENDA passes, you know what that means? That means we have the equivalent of the 1964 Civil Rights Act for the LGBT community. That is powerful. Well, we will be much more protected and we will be able to get our cases really listened to. Now, one of the other things you have to remember in your strategic planning with the groups that you work with for your agencies and departments is how are you going to get this stuff documented? That is very, very significant. And how are you going to teach your people to make sure that their cases are well made and defendable? Well, one of the things you have to teach your people is to think like attorneys. You have to really look at this like you are a criminal attorney and you are prosecuting. How are you going to find that person guilty for what they've done? You have got to have evidence. You have got to have witness lists. And where possible, speak to those witnesses and make sure they're on board. And you have got to document what happened where. A lot of times when these things happen, people just want to talk to you privately and tell you absolutely nothing and they don't want anything in writing. Put things in writing. Email and make the blind carbon copies, that BCC, it stands for blind carbon copies. Make sure you send copies of everything to a non-federal email account in case your email account mysteriously gets wiped out. these things have been known to happen. So I really recommend strongly prepare, because a lot of times people think, well, I'm hurting, this is horrible, they should be allowed to do this. Well, that is a natural reaction, but you cannot win an EEO case or an Office of Special Counsel case based on your hurt emotions, okay? Because then they could just say, well, that person's just hard to deal with. They're overly emotional, isn't that what they say? Or they're a bad actor. You know, before that you were, you know, the #1 star performer. The minute they realized you were an LGBT person, suddenly you don't even know how to turn on the light in the room at the office. So you really have to be smart about these things. If we get ENDA as a federal piece of legislation that is passed and signed into law, it will give us a much better avenue. And not just us, but everybody in the nation. There are states in this nation that are so anti-equality and so anti the working class person that they have laws that really give all the rights, respect, and responsibilities to the people in charge. So the people who are the top 1%, whether they're the top 1% of management in an organization run by a government entity or by a commercial entity, they have all the power. And as I learned when I took a law class for business law years ago in Ohio, in the state of Ohio, it's legal to fire somebody for being ugly. There are all kinds of laws on the books in this nation, and we are a nation that allows states' rights to have a very serious precedence. And so it's important to have national law that goes above that, because some of these states have very peculiar laws. I do believe Virginia had on its books for a very long time, it might still, but I'm not sure, that women are their husband's chattel. That means that if you are married to a man and you are a woman, he owns you. Not cool. So, you know, you have to realize that a national law is more powerful than an executive order, and it's more powerful than having laws in states. So it cuts across everything, so that if in a state where, you know, it's very anti-LGBT, there is this national law known as ENDA. And some of you live in some of those states. Not everybody's from the DC area. It'll just be wonderful to have that. You can organize with not only people in the federal side, but also people in your local community about these things, and bring attention to the dysfunction within the society towards this group. And we've helped people get organized and participate in events globally. We have leadership all over the world, pretty much, in most of the continents: Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Mideast, as well as here. We're also always looking, because we're an all-volunteer force, for more people. We include in what is covered under DOD FED GLOBE is all employees, past, present, service members, civil servants, and aligned corporations to the Department of Defense. For those of you who understand OMB's budget, you will know that the DOD is the largest part of the federal government. In fact, if you added everybody else up, we're bigger. Then when you show how many companies we are aligned with, we're humongous. So this is the majority of the industrial base. And we did that intentionally because we know that the LGBT folks that are working in these corporations, and so whatever the amount of federal workers you have, the corporation's quantity of people that support that federal entity is usually anywhere from 3 to 7 times the size of the amount of people you have on board in the federal entity. So it's large. And so we knew that when the people in the corporations work with our federal folks and we're their customers, if we are homophobic, then that makes their lives more difficult, and they have to go from their open-minded company to the closed federal government, and they are forced in the closet. And we know that the closet makes everything uncomfortable, and it really diminishes productivity. So that was one of the reasons we included all those folks, and that's one of the reasons why we do what we do.
Could you share your website?
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Kirst. I work for IBM. So last year I got to come down Equal for the first time, obviously. It was a pretty big deal because I think about a week before Don't Ask, Don't Tell ended. So I went from being very, very closeted to celebrated really, really quickly. And last year I took the opportunity to talk to Out and Equal, the folks on the staff here, and they said, would you share your story? And I said, absolutely. So I quickly gave a testimony last year, and within a week's period, my life changed. I got to meet a lot of amazing people. And essentially what it was is, I just told my story. I said that, for the past 10 years, I'd have to be on the sidelines, and now I don't have to be on the sidelines. I can actually tell my story and talk to people, and I'm kind of in that triple space. So I'm a contractor who worked in the Pentagon for up to 4 years. I'm also a captain of the Army Reserve, so I put on the uniform and lead in that. And I work for a company like IBM. So it was interesting. I had to kind of keep my feet in both worlds. On certain issues, I had to be very quiet, and in other parts of my life, I had a company that was celebrating and leading this charge. So it's great to be back here this year. It is a much smaller group, I guess, due to the weather, but I'm still very actively involved with OutServe, SLDN. I know of Fed GLOBE. I work a lot with the folks in USAID and State Department as well in Washington. So I'm also managing a Veterans Affairs project right now. So I mentor a lot of veterans, and I would like to talk to more veterans on the LGBT issues.
Just share a little bit about what you did, how it went.
So I'm walking down the hall, minding my own business, and I get approached by our EEO program coordinator, who pulls me into her office and she goes, I have a question. Would you be interested? Okay. Well, what will it entail? What do I have to do? Well, you have to start it. There isn't one. I'm like, oh, come on. There's how many VAs in the country? There's got to be one. So where do I call? San Francisco. You would think, no, they don't need it there. That's what I got told. We don't need it. Okay. So then, I get with my director of the hospital, and we sit down and we have a plan. Now, for 2 years, we've been doing secret celebrations. They were there without being announced, kind of things. But they wanted to make it big. The first year was in 2004, was my first year as the EEO Special Influence Manager for the LGBT. My life was threatened. I was escorted by police the day of the event. I had maybe 10 people show up to the event because you had to go through our security in order to come in. Kind of made for a really bad day. So we then sat around and talked with all of our executives and our leadership committees, and how can we make this happen? It's going to happen. We're going to make this happen. But how can we do it and have safety? Safety was our big issue, because who's going to want to come and have their life threatened? I had to go. I was running it. I was nervous, but I went. So by the second year, the first year, the signs the posters we made, the second we put them up, we turned our back, they were gone. So I went to Kinko's and I made copies and copies and copies, and I kept putting it up. Take it, do what you want with it, learn. It had a lot of good information on it. Maybe they're learning something. We have been celebrating Pride for 12 years now at the Portland VA Medical Center in Portland, Oregon. And we are very proud of that. Michael Carlson and Dr. James Tushman, who was the director at the time, and the executive administrative assistant at the time, are the ones that actually started the program. I took it from them, and I just actually made it a legal program that we now get funded for. We have a budget, we have committees, and like I said, it's been 12 years.
Sure. Also, after we got going in VA, what we did is sometimes when you're doing this work in a federal agency, you become the point person. Like, you know, Jeff is the expert on all LGBT things, but then you find out that, you know, no one person can really be that. And so what VA has done through the Office of Diversity and Inclusion is they have created a work group, which Jeff is on and some of our other attendees here, that actually has a website for employees, it has a website, but it has an email for employees within the department that you can write into with questions, and those questions get answered. I'd like Dot Costa to just come up for a second. She's also been doing some work actually with our veterans and I believe transgender veterans as well, is that correct? Or you'll tell us, but yeah, but she'll tell you just a little bit about what she's done in more of a clinical
I'm Dot
basis.
Hofstetter. I'm a licensed clinical social worker for VA Maine Healthcare System in Augusta, Maine. And I am also on the Employees Resource Group out of Central Office in DC. And I began the Special Emphasis Program in Maine, and the chairperson, Special Emphasis Program Manager for that, as well as a member sitting on the ERG. I do work with a lot of LGBT veterans that come in. I'm a social worker on the inpatient psychiatric unit. So we see a lot of veterans coming in with mental illness and diagnoses like PTSD and depression and anxiety that they're facing every day. And it has worsened when they went into the military, especially before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And many of the veterans had been faced with trying to keep that secretive. I also began an LGBT veteran peer support group in our hospital. And what I found there when we started, veterans were so excited that they were finally able to be themselves and tell their story and hear that encouragement from each other. And there also was their concern that if they come to the VA and be open and have their provider see them coming into this group, that they would somehow be hurt or treated badly medically or in their mental health treatment. So many of them stopped coming. And we eventually had to disband that because we just didn't have enough veterans. And our need to be able to grow that is to have more funding available, more marketing in our communities, more marketing to the gay communities, more outreach, more education. And when we don't have that, we have this, we're not able to grow. We're not able to reach out to people, and we're handicapped. And I think that that's what our need is we need to put more funding in the LGBT communities and welcoming our LGBT veterans.
In the VA too, is we started a mail group that we sort of felt that folks might need additional cultural competence, or as someone said yesterday in a People of Color panel, cultural humility. I thought that was another way of saying cultural competency. But we actually only within the Department of Veterans Affairs now in AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees that I'm now working with in addition to my VA work, we're sharing those articles, but it's within only our agency. But you might think about for other federal agencies, is there a mail group that you could start where people would sort of not by promotion, but by attraction. So for example, if Central Office said we have this mail group, or someone sort of says, hey, would you like to be on it? We now have about 275 people on that mail group, and I just share articles with people on LGBT cultural competency. But it's been really beautiful because it's uplifted a sense of community among us, which I don't know most of the people on that mail group, but it's just nice to feel.
I'll be very organized as well. My name is Mali Kigasari, M-A-L-I, last name K-I-G-A-S-A-R-I. I'm a senior investigator, trilingual investigator with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in San Francisco District Office. I started working with the EOC about 4 years ago, January 2009. President Obama and I started at the same time. The reason I'm name dropping here is because one of the first acts that he did was that he appointed Commissioner Kove as one of the EOC commissioners. And Kove is the first out lesbian ever appointed to the position of commissioner at the EOC. So it was a big deal. It was a big deal. And she has been a force of nature within our organization. She has moved heaven and earth. It has been an honor to be working at the EEOC and really watching history evolve. I walked into the San Francisco district office for about 4 years ago, and I felt like I was walking in the 1970s. We felt so far behind. I came to this country from Iran. Well, I had a couple of detours, England, Spain, that's how I picked up my other languages. And then I came to Berkeley as a student. And when I arrived to Berkeley, I really realized this was utopia. It's like, this is where I could be myself. And, you know, where else in the world? A person by the name of Kigasari can come to this country penniless, and somebody else is paying my rent because my English was so bad I couldn't even get a job. Wow. So, only in America, right? And why is it that America is not just a country, but is really an ideal? It's because of the civil rights laws. And how lucky that I get to enforce these civil rights laws as a law enforcement officer. I do have a badge, actually. So, someone born and raised in Iran comes to Berkeley, becomes successful monetarily, marries the most wonderful person in the whole world, and I can say that 18 years later. So this person now has to pay back, right? Because the civil rights laws made this country what it is, really an envy of the world. And I've got family, because of the revolution in 1979 in Iran, I've got relatives all over the world. I don't have to pay for a hotel anywhere I go. That's how everybody that did leave after 1979, 1980. So, working at the EEOC, it's an honor to be enforcing the civil rights laws. And it's also my very first federal government job. I've never worked for the federal government. So, I sort of have to understand and learn how to maneuver the system and survive and thrive in the system. So one of the first things that Commissioner Feldblum wanted to do was to start an employee resource group. We did not have a pride group or anything similar to that. So all of a sudden, we have a great ally in my office who's a judge with Social Security now, Eve Hernandez. She comes to my office. And she's been an ally. We've done a lot of on-AIDS stuff, and actually her husband saved me because there was a group of Samoans that surrounded me, and they were just reaching to beat the shit out of me. Oh, excuse me, I'm on the camera. And you know, her husband, who's a doctor, you know, he's a little tiny guy from Guatemala. He just basically pushed all these huge guys, and he just pulled me out of the group and said, "Let's go now." So, huge ally, and I think one of the things that I really want to emphasize more than anything else, in San Francisco District Office, every time we have a Pride event, we have more allies than gays, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, and we sort of come up with the term post-gay, because some of our gay co-workers, they are so post-gay, we can't even get them to come to any of our events, so another issue. So Kove Feldblum pushed on this idea of having an EEOC affinity group. So we started a group, and everyone in the DC that is part of the EEOC Pride is somebody. And in fact, I'm the only nobody. I'm the only non-manager, GS12, right? So I'm the Secretary of Pride, but I have to say in the past 3 years, I'm so proud of the work that we've done. The folks that are the member of the Pride in DC, they are SESs, 14s and 15s. Some of them work at the Office of Federal Operations. Any of you doesn't know who it is, what it is, Office of Federal Operations. Basically, it's when a federal sector employee files a complaint and it goes through the EEO process, it goes to an AJ hearing, and if you don't like the conclusion of that hearing, you can appeal it. When it gets appealed, it goes to the Office of Federal Operations, and they can hear it. Which actually leads me to Mia Macy. How many of you have heard about Mia Macy case? EEOC Pride, first thing you want to do is make alliances with allies. Really, allies are your champions. And I can't emphasize, get the allies.
Stephen Wilmoth, and I am with NASA, specifically Ames Research Center, which is located in California in the Silicon Valley. We also have representatives here from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We were scheduled to have folks from Johnson and also from our closest center, Goddard, and we haven't heard from them yet, so we're not exactly sure how many of us are totally going to be here, but we also have a booth. NASA has field center makeup. We have a headquarters in DC, and then we have 9 to 10 field centers, depending on what you consider our contractor facility in Pasadena. But out of those groups, about half of us have what you would call employee resource groups. We have a number of different terms, including, in my case, we are an advisory group to our Equal Opportunity Office. So we are a special emphasis advisory group, if you will, and there are a number of those at my center. Interestingly enough, NASA headquarters does not have any of them. And that's been a challenge for us as we try to organize nationally, trying to get that top-down representation. So we do have an Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity, in that we are running up a charter for a formal employee resource group that we would like to have recognized by the agency, so that we have sort of a mechanism, if you will, to connect. Because right now, this is all done 10% beyond. I don't care for the term overachiever that Lisa was saying, but I will tell you that I think most of the people I know within NASA are all high achievers and certainly expect to excel at their work. And so everything that we're doing in this area of diversity is always above and beyond. There are a few people who are employed in our Equal Opportunity group whose job it is to cover these content areas, but that's not most of us. Most of us have other jobs, and so we're doing this in addition. I don't know if that's the case for you as well, Matt. But fortunately for me, in my particular situation, I'm endorsed by my management to participate in these activities, which is great. That's not true at some of our other centers. We have an active group at Marshall Space Flight Center, and they have been able to participate the last couple of years in Out and Equal through their own funds. So they take their annual leave, they pay the registration themselves, and they come to the event. And they just felt that they couldn't do that this year. And they are getting to that point where they realize that they have to get that management support in order to really make progress at their center. Now, Marshall Space Flight Center is in Huntsville, Alabama. And so you can just see, there's a very different experience depending on where you are as a federal employee, which state you happen to reside in, what support you get outside your gates and inside your gates. And so for us, that's one of the issues that we're dealing with across our agency, is trying to figure out, what do we need from those various directions? In California, many of us are married. Many of us were married during that brief period of time before Prop 8 was passed. Many of the people have gotten married in other places. And so we're in a unique situation there in terms of trying to get benefits and so forth. Whereas our counterparts in Marshall, we also have a center in Mississippi. A lot of these folks are just dealing with basic security for their jobs, basic level rights at what our previous keynote speaker talked about, that level of maturity. So we're all over the map in terms of our level of maturity for our groups, because again, we have people who are really just fighting to be themselves in the workplace, and then those of us who are really pushing our administration. In fact, there's a lawsuit going through right now from I'm not involved in this, but some of the employees at Ames Research Center are suing the agency to get benefits because they are married and they would like for their partners to be covered. I'll just say one other thing before I wrap up. We also had a really interesting experience this past summer, and honestly, we as a group haven't even processed it. But Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, she passed away in July, and as part of the process, she had made arrangements to come out and for her 27-year relationship with her partner to be recognized, and at the same time, to not have her legacy become about that. And so we in the LGBT community within NASA are sort of trying to figure out how do we do this? How do we celebrate a high achiever? Obviously, within NASA, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people contribute. We get into space. We do important things in exploration, and yet not make her be the kind of spokesperson posthumously that she didn't want to be, because she did not want to come out, even though she was in a very stable relationship and had long left NASA. She's been with Stanford for many years and then started up her own organization, which does really great work, in fact, for science for girls specifically. I got a chance to meet her through that project, and she was really dedicated to trying to make sure that girls and women have opportunities in science, and that's sort of key to my heart as well. So this is one of these areas where, okay, we have a really high level, very visible lesbian achiever who didn't want to be known for her lesbianism. And so how do you do that and get people to recognize that we can be more by bringing our whole selves to work, and at the same time, it's not going to prevent us from continuing those achievements and doing important things. So that's kind of where we're at. And we are, my personal group from Ames Research Center, we fought that battle, I want to say it's been about 5 years ago now, where we wanted to march in the San Francisco parade, and we coordinated, and then we sort of casually asked, because most of us thought we really don't need to do this. This is our own time and doing our own things. But it turns out that the act that created NASA is called the Space Act of 1958. It actually is very specific about when and where the NASA logo can be used. And in fact, anyone who wants to use that logo has to get specific permission. And so we decided, well, okay, we need to follow that rule. So we asked for permission and we were denied. And it was sent up to NASA headquarters and they denied it. So then we came back and we just said, fine, we will just march with a banner that says the words National Aeronautics and Space Administration, because there's nothing that says we can do that. Some of our folks wanted to use a slogan like "not allowed to say" or something else. And so eventually our center relented and said, you know what, this is ridiculous. Of course you're NASA employees. Of course you can organize just like an African American group or any other group. And once they really sat back and thought about it, they realized we had gone directly to the lawyers, and that was probably the wrong thing to do, because it was our management who came in and said, no, that's ridiculous. Of course they can use that logo. And so we did, and we got a huge cheer. We were a fairly small group, and we got a nice recognition at the parade. And I believe in the last 2 years, I think our folks at Goddard Space Flight Center have marched in the DC parade, and I believe that they have.
Lisa, I talked about Lisa about every third day of my life at the Pentagon with Captain Barrett. But I'm just going to say briefly that I was incredibly passionate about the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell for 2 reasons. One, I was born into the Air Force. And secondly, because I think a lot of young LGBT kids end up in the military. And they're either escaping their home life or it may be an economic reason. And so after I left the Human Rights Campaign, I spent 3 years just darting in, frankly, and almost like a mole, because no one knew I was there, and working very closely with Admiral Mike Mullen. And if you look at the working group document, it's a beautiful document because it ends up concluding time and time again zero tolerance for discrimination, which is a huge journey inside of less than 20 years to go from, complete bias and homophobia to zero tolerance. The biggest flaw in the final report, but it was necessary to get it through Congress, is that each service member, as you know, is treated as a single soldier or a single sailor, or there is no notion. Marriage is the least of it. It's almost irrelevant. I think what you want to fight for right now within the military is for even a domestic partnership arrangement to be recognized, because the time will come when the Supreme Court rules and marriage will be recognized. However, right now, it is a bridge too far, and the military never went that far in terms of the final document that got approved by Congress to repeal the Don't Ask, Don't Tell. On the issue of uniforms, I just produced an event of the one-year anniversary of the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell aboard the USS Intrepid in New York. And we did it for Service Members Legal Defense Network, which is merging into OutServe. And it was kind of a miracle because as of May 1, it didn't exist. There was no notion of an event. And by September 18th, we had 1,200 people aboard the Intrepid. Admiral Mike Mullen was the keynote. We had Barbara Walters as the mistress of ceremonies, and we had amazing Broadway numbers, and I love schmaltz, so we had the whole history. They did Because I Knew You from Wicked with the whole history from 1993 on. And we had a guy in his 90s who had been dishonorably discharged in World War II, and that night he got his honorable discharge. And so it was incredibly moving. And we had roughly half of the people there were service members or cadets, all in uniform and all happy. And we did do a disclaimer at the top of the evening, which I wouldn't let them put on, I'd have them bury it in the brochure, because we didn't want to start off on that note. And it was an amazing moment of celebration and a documented historic event of just a real milestone in the crazy journey that is America. So it seems to me that there's a weird fact, which is if you're an enforcement agency like the FBI, like CIA, maybe NSA, I'm not sure.
CIA is not enforcement, excuse me.
Well, they are not under Title VII for benefits, so what they've been able to do, what they can do, and I know the CIA is one of these, they actually come under a mirror policy for benefits, and you can have domestic partner coverage now at the CIA, which is bizarre. I mean, the Defense of Marriage Act exists, and there are a few agencies that have figured out this very interesting route. I just did it for the Securities and Exchange Commission and did a whole analysis as to how they could also implement domestic partner coverage. So, in fact, the closer you get to marriage while DOMA exists, the more you set yourself up for a collision. You know, it's good to think in terms of any kind of relationship recognition when you're thinking. Most agencies, though, you're under Title VII for benefits, and there's no loophole. So we wrote it for the Navy only, and changed a number of the hypotheticals so there were more balanced. You know, they had every hypothetical was really sort of weighted against the gay person, so it was always a negative. You know, two people are going to be bunking in the same area, and the straight recruit, you know, freaks out. What do you do? They were all skewed, and so I basically went through and rebalanced it and added some things for the chaplains. You know, you have a parishioner who's a lesbian. The entire congregation loves the lesbian and her family. The chaplain is uncomfortable. What do you do? So I just switched some of the hypos and switched the language to elevate it a bit. But believe me, they had already done, I think, a substantially good job. I just did wordsmithing and definitely altered some of the hypos. And I think mostly in the discourse and debate helped to just shift the consciousness a tiny bit and move people along their own path to, you know, to understand that the training needed to also take into account that 3/4 of the United States military had changed since 1993, literally been replaced. So You should have seen the leaders. They were incredible. One of the most moving people was like General Carter Ham, who basically, a lot of you are young, but Lou Grant on the Married to, that was his personality, kind of universally grumpy. And when he was given this assignment, he was like, "You're going to give me this assignment?" And he was just like, very much a tough military guy and did not necessarily want to head the working group. And honestly, the magic in the process was being exposed to LGBT service members, mostly retired, mostly veterans, because you couldn't be out. And it was in that process that he melted, meeting real warriors that were gay, lesbian, bisexual. And the repeal doesn't deal with transgender. And by the end, he was like to me, "Do you know, Elizabeth, that these people are separated from their partners?" And I said, "Yes, General, I know. I mean, that's sad, right?" And he'd say, "Yeah, do you really understand them? They're off in Iraq and they can't talk to their partner." And I went, "Yes, General, it's really sad." And, so I have to say the leadership was really magnificent in how they opened themselves up to hearing real stories of real warriors. And I know that this is all about war and so on, and we are talking about a military command, a chain of command and control, and it is about war, but that aside, it was an incredibly moving process to watch. Yeah. And Kai Feldblum wrote ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. Yeah, just for history. I like everyone to learn their history.
She also worked on the ADAAA.
She did. Americans with Disabilities Act.
I was wondering if you knew much about the Healthcare Equality Index with the HRC teamed up with Veterans Health Administration to do that.
They did, and I wrote the Corporate Equality Index myself because I came out of Apple. And that had been early work we did in California. And then we acquired it from an amazing guy who had evolved it. And so Corporate Equality Index, I'm an expert, but that came after my tenure. But I guess it's a great thing. If you measure it, it will happen. Yeah.
The event that you talked about with Barbara Walters and all, was that video?
Yeah, it's on the SLDN site, and it's really moving.
Hi, my name's Anthony Wynn, and wasn't really prepared for this, so I'm not exactly certain what I'm going to say. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Region 1 and Region 8, which is basically the entire West Coast, including Hawaii and all the Pacific Trust territories. And our agency, our bureau, falls under the Department of the Interior. And we're coming along, excuse me, we're coming along here. The Department of the Interior, under Secretary Salazar, has been very good with issues of inclusion and diversity. I would say over the past year to year and a half, especially with the start of the Diversity Change Agent program in the Department of the Interior. And there have been many trainings throughout the country, and several hundred, probably more than 1,000 people have been trained. And I would say around 200 or so diversity agents around the country working in the various bureaus under the Department of the Interior. I work in diversity and civil rights in our region, and was just recently appointed as the CBOM for LGBT, and looking forward to working on that in the coming months and years. So that's sort of where I am.
My name is Scott Shevlin. I'm with the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation Enforcement. We are also part of the Department of Interior. We are the smallest bureau under the Department of Interior and further behind in our diversity program than anybody else. Our mission is to collect fees from the coal companies to have the land returned to the way it was before they started mining. 50% of our fees that we collect go to the United Mine Workers to take care of black lung disease and other coal-related diseases. We have a good old boy network that's very hard to penetrate. Our executive council, most of our senior executives have been in the Bureau up to 20 years. We have very few that are brand new into the agency. I am a diversity change agent. I have gone through the DOI training. I was in the very first class and I was really enthused about it. And I went back to the Bureau and was trying to get them to start implementing some of our stuff. It's still a fight. HR and EEO still refuse to allow me to send out anything that has to do with GLBT to the entire Bureau. Again, I'm fighting that. I have reached out to the Department of Interior, has a diversity change officer who's at the SES level, and I reached out to him and asked him to start working with me. We have a meeting starting next week to try and get our executive council to start recognizing that it's not just those areas that are measured under EEO that need to have recognition, that we all do. So that's where we are at Office of Surface Mining.